And that's pretty much 30 seconds. So I suppose we'll kick off. Well, thank you everyone who is attending. Welcome to the Author Name Change panel hosted by STM. My name's Sam Goodchild, and I'm a publisher at Springer Nature and have been involved with STM for about a year, or just under a year. I'm joined today by Dr. Irving Rettig, who is an inorganic chemist and transgender activist in the STEM fields. Also joined by Jessica Hoy, who has a PhD in chemistry from Washington University in St. Louis, and is a journal manager at AIP Publishing, focusing on strategies and projects. And also, we're finally joined by Ed Gerstner, who's the Director of Research Environment Alliances at Springer Nature, who's been in the industry for a number of years. So welcome one and all. Right, to start off, I suppose we'll just crack in to the questions. Maybe you'd like to unmute yourselves of the panelists. And the first question is sort of, what is the community need for an author name change policy? And that's first directed at Irving.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody for coming to this panel. It's always really wonderful to talk about this subject. And so the question is, what is the, why is there a community need, or what is the community need around policies? And really with the sort of increased visibility of trans people all across the globe, and the increased call for, the addressing the infrastructures in which trans people are experiencing discrimination or oppression, we turn our gaze to the publishing world. And I'd like to note that I really don't think that the publishing world is, trying to actively harm transgender people. I think that they fall into the category of, basically a lot of other organizations, in that, when the infrastructure was first built, that trans people didn't have a seat at the table, for whatever reason that was. And so when policies were made, that the sort of intricacies and nuances of making trans inclusive policy just was not present. And so what that sort of culminated in, at least, as it pertains to this panel, is that then, when authors who came out as transgender, following starting their publishing record, went to sort of correct the record to, reflect their identity, that they encountered, challenges in getting what they wanted, because the infrastructure was there to get what they wanted, which is getting post-publication name change, but the modality of implementation was problematic. And so the sort of need for this arose in, in essentially being able to lower or remove barriers for having your public record reflect your identity, without, sort of unnecessary hoops that, that would result in, say, something as bad as outing an author, on a public forum without their consent. And so this work, I think, started a long time ago, but it really kicked up speed in 2019 and 2020, and that's where we are today.
So yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that. So why could you maybe sort of elaborate a little bit more about sort of your personal experience and how you've come to that point of view, or not come to that push for the need for this author name change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my personal stake in this, I think, came from experience, like you were just saying. I transitioned while I was in graduate school. So when I started graduate school, I identified as a cis woman. And, within a very short period of time of starting grad school, I decided to undergo medical transition, so hormone replacement hormone replacement therapy, and the process of social transition, which includes, or at least for me, included changing my name. And then that really went exceptionally well. I was really supported by my my graduate advisor and my department. And then I, was ending my graduate career and starting to look towards postdoctoral opportunities, and realized that in sharing my public record with potential advisors, that I was giving them access to my dead name because I had published prior to transitioning. And so when I then sort of asked if there was any method of correcting this, there was a yes that I received, but then in addition to the sort of typical erratum or corrections that are issued with post publication changes, and that was just not an option that I was interested in. And so I was kind of surprised, and I think that the journal was also surprised that that was the only thing that they were able to offer. And I think that really that both sides were confounded by this issue, I think really highlights where the change started to come from. That it was, maybe publishers didn't necessarily recognize the exact need, but they recognized that there was an issue that needed to be resolved. And so, I when I first then started to just like inquire and ask and try to talk to other people, I talked about this at conferences. I talked about this at, other like women in STEM type meetings to see if I could just find anybody else who was encountering this problem or was interested in trying to address it. And in the meantime, I was sending out my CV and sending out my publications and putting a black box over the PDF where my name was, and having an asterisk at the bottom of my, sort of inquiry email asking, can you please please ignore all of your scientific tendencies for curiosity and don't go hunting for a name that I'm trying to hide. And I think that in, through social media and through just starting to talk to people more, I found people outside of my own field who were encountering the same issue at, varying degrees of I would say severity. And I think that it was from that sort of shared experience and realizing that the individual was not going to get very far with this, that a group of transgender authors organized to try to approach journals about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It's really important, I think, for people to hear, your personal stories. But sort of leading on from that as well, who else is impacted by by these issues, really? And could you explain a little bit more about those people?
Yeah. So I guess just elaborating on, what was the state of the other folks, that had a stake in this. And, it ranged. I think that my case was one that was particularly easy because it was just a single publication, that needed that post-publication correction. But, in reality, that, there's not really a sort of formula for transitioning, which means that people will, people who are transgender who then decide to publicly transition might do so in their 40s, might do so in their 50s and 60s. And, if you think about somebody who has had a career, as in, in academic publishing, that, they might have, hundreds of papers with thousands of citations. And that was the case for a number of the folks who were trying to work towards more inclusive name change policies. That, for them, the stake was, they had nothing to lose because their public record was fractured, and it was, in ways that were challenging to measure, having impacts on their career. And so, really, that when we're talking about, sort of like who these policies impact the most in terms of benefit, and who we're trying to model these policies for are, trans elders, folks who come out later in life. And then it's a cascade down. And I think that that's a really great way of modeling a policy, is to try to, uplift, the most marginalized identity, the person who's most negatively impacted, and that then the trickle down will benefit other people. So it'll benefit young publishers who have one or two publications that they need changed. It will benefit, people who get married, who change their name and want that married name to reflect the public record. It will help benefit divorced people who published, under a name that they no longer, hold as their own. And I think that what that leads to is just this cascade of harm reduction across a lot of different identities. And I think that it did start with supporting trans elders.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's really important to consider, all the people that will be affected by these policies. Jessica, I do want to sort of bring you in sort of about what some of the technical hurdles have been to sort of accommodating some of these requests, really, and what you've done to support the transgender community through that.
Yeah, thank you. As you've heard so far, there is obviously a big motivation for these policies to change. And as Irving mentioned, previously we had errata as the most common pathway for making any sort of post-publication changes. And this is very public facing. And so, the discussions were really important. And I will just direct everyone's attention to something that Irving and a working group that COPE puts together worked on. So there were these 5 guiding principles and best practices. And I really feel like this helped, at least it helped us. And I've heard from other publishers, and you can see in the other publishers' policies on author name changes, these 5 guiding principles from this working group really helped to formulate these new author name change policies. And so the principles are accessibility, making sure that the name change requests are easily accessible without sharing any sort of legal documentation or anything like that. Comprehensiveness anywhere within the paper, supplemental info, acknowledgements, invisibility, that's the key one, that it doesn't need to be accompanied by any sort of publisher's note or erratum. Expediency, having things done in a timely manner, minimum amount of overhead, and then recurrence and maintenance, just making sure that documents continue to be monitored for any additional changes that need to be made. So, we evaluated these 5 points, and we, crafted a policy, and it seems that many other publishers did the same. You can see these elements within their policies as well, with a heavy focus on the invisibility portion. And so one of the tricky aspects, of course, is just verifying identity and making sure that the change is being requested from the appropriate party. And so that has been difficult, but authors will see as they go, if they're trying to implement an author name change request from any publisher, they'll see within the policy there will be some requests for perhaps a profile update, perhaps an intake form to be filled out. There will be an email address that will be provided so that you can ask and answer certain questions back and forth with the publisher. And I think one aspect of this that's come up is around perhaps rolling out ORCID more widely and making that as an option to link the papers to sort of an individual, almost like a barcode. I think Irving had mentioned a barcode at one point, having something that's very specific to the individual to allow for connecting all of those articles to the individual. And then, the name being sort of supplemental information. So yeah, that's that's sort of a summary of some of the, elements of the policy, and then some of the initial sticking points. We have had a few name change requests so far, and they've gone smoothly and on time. But of course, this is very iterative too. We're looking to get feedback from authors as we work with them, and to identify any areas for improvement on the process itself, and perhaps the policy as needed.
So about how long does that process take from, say, when you receive an application to, updates of published articles?
So far for us, all have been under 30 days. We do state that that's our goal timeline in our FAQ. Of course, we acknowledge that with some of the older papers that are, only, camera ready, or an older version of a manuscript, those might be a little bit more difficult, just depending. But so far, we've been able to achieve these all under 30 days.
I mean, from my point of view, that just sounds quite rapid, knowing some of the scales at which publishing does operate at. 30 days is a really sort of quick turnaround time. Welcome back, Ed. We had noticed you dropped off, so good to have you back. And when you have audio, do let us know. Irving, from an author's point of view, how does it sort of feel to have within sort of the space of about 30 days to have your dead name removed from the record and have a complete academic record available to you?
I mean, for me personally, right, that 30-day window was one that was super feasible because it was just a single publication. And so, for me, it was like just the relief of having some unsent emails, that were pertaining to my career, getting a chance to like go in and remove this thing that might distract from like me as an applicant or me as a person. Because in reality, it's like, yes, I want these things changed because, I want to be seen as a scientist, as an author, not as a, not necessarily like having my identity be the first thing in that order that somebody gets access to critiquing. And I think that it's interesting to hear that 30 days feels long, but I understand that, and I have experienced it now that I've been working within the publishing community for so long. 2 years, but as somebody who's not a publisher, or works for a journal, I think that's decent. But yeah, and it's funny because it is I would say it's something that feels like a relief, like finally, that it's not necessarily something that is this sort of like big celebratory win, but it's this very sort of like, just okay, like things are the way that they should be. And I think that's an interesting sort of experience to have, but I think that it is because it's something that is a wrong that needs to be righted, and so there is that sense of relief, but I think that there's some sort of like caveats to that, and that within a publisher that you can go on the publisher website and you can pull up your PDF like with your name on it, and then you can go to an aggregate site, and the timelines for those names getting changed or updated from publishers is slower. Like Google is the absolute slowest, and they are an impenetrable force, but it took half of a year for them to finally update my name after the publisher changed it within 10 days. And so, it's this interesting dichotomy between the just like the relief and the happiness and the joy of, getting to feel like you belong in publishing, and then the very rapid reminder that this is a complicated system that is going to need a lot of changes on a lot of different levels in order to realize what I think everybody wants to happen.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Ed, I don't know sort of what stage exactly you rejoined us, but we were talking about some of the hurdles and the challenges of implementing this this policy, and I just wanted to hear about sort of some of the processes that you underwent and some of your experiences doing that.
Well, the thing that regularly strikes me about this is it always brings me back to the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The reason why it is so difficult to change in so many different systems is because it never occurred to anyone that we needed to be able to do this. Partly that's because of the way that we publish is very much based on print. Print continues to influence the way we do so many things, and we're slowly moving away from print as the defining medium of scientific and scholarly publishing. But that's a slow process. But what really occurred, so the first time I raised this as an issue, I was involved. My previous role at Springer Nature was director of policy and strategy for journals, and we were in a policy group meeting, and we were discussing whether we would whether we be able to change names as a consequence of marriage on previous papers, and the conclusion was, because people had access to things like ORCID IDs, the people could change their name and still maintain a connection to their publications under a previous name through things like ORCID. And I've been paying attention. A lot of the things I learn about the world is through Twitter these days, or has been for many, many years now, actually. And I kind of went, actually, I think that doesn't solve everyone's problems. I think that the issue of dead names is going to be something that comes up in the next 2 years. I think and this policy doesn't solve that, because the issues of the trans community are different in kind, different in nature to the issues of married people. And I said, I reckon this will come up again in 2 years. It came up in 2 months. When someone contacted me with a problem, they were trying to change their name. And it was just, it was lucky that I was aware of this through people that I follow on Twitter, but it would have been even better had we had greater representation on that body in publishing and in spaces where these sorts of decisions about infrastructures, about policies, and all of this gets made. And so that's one of the reasons why we and many other publishers are very much committed to trying to improve DEI, because it makes it easier. We're able to see the problems that we create and preempt them, and that's just better for all of us. It's better for our authors, and if it's better for our authors, it's better for us. But ultimately, the other thing that this whole space has really underlined for me is it's reaffirmed my faith in humanity. Every time I have raised the need to change this policy, I've gotten no pushback whatsoever. Everyone has been fully into understanding the problem. Actually, they see the problem relatively easily, and they want to fix it. The problem is that, as I said, because everything that we do is based on print, we don't have the systems in place that change these. The technical aspect of this is just very challenging, and it varies from publisher to publisher to publisher to publisher. Everyone has their different systems, and it's particularly challenging for Springer Nature because we publish books, we publish journals, we publish conference proceedings, and we have lots of different imprints and lots of history and lots of society publishers with their own different ways of handling this or that or the other. So it's such a complex system. But one of the things that it has enabled us to do is say, okay, how do we create processes and structures that enable us to adapt to the world as it evolves? So there have been benefits and challenges all along the way.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like yeah, plenty of challenges and plenty of benefits to be had as well. To sort of delve a little bit further into some of those technical problems, like where do those changes in name have to take place within a book or an article, and what has to be updated and where?
Well, when we originally discussed it, we thought, okay, we just need to make sure that we change the name in the front bit underneath the title. But then it became clear, oh well, but hang on, there's also initials in places like conflicts of interest and acknowledgements and author contributions, and there are different ways in which initials can be rendered, even if for a given name. So there's, in my case, my name is Edmund Glenn Gerstner. My initials are EGG or E.G.G or E.space, G.space, G.space. And all of these variations exist in the PDF, and they don't exist in some sort of structured metadata sort of way. So you have to physically search for all of these things within the text. And then some books and some journals have autobiographies, so you've got to fix the pronouns often in those cases as well. And there are different ways in which different things. So, for example, citing GitHub, sometimes it's in the references, sometimes it's in the main text, but often it will involve a dead name. That needs to be fixed as well. And there's covers, and I haven't even mentioned the whole problem of citations. How do we, we need to fix citations as well, but there are many different places in which citations exist. When we see them, we try and change them, but we can't change them. It's difficult. We can't search the entire literature and easily fix them throughout the entire literature, because again, the citations aren't based on some sort of universal ID for a work. They are based on print, which is, it's in that journal collection, on this page, in this, and how that is rendered, and that's a nightmare. There were some questions, like, so within a work, if an author wants to change their name within their work and they've cited their previous works, should we allow them to change the citations? And my argument has been, yes, we should be able to change their citations. And the argument was that, but that unless it is actually changed within those citations, it will break those citations. And my argument is, someday these will be fixed. So it's either going to be broken now or it's going to be broken in the future. And I think we should be resolving to make sure that they're not broken in the future. So let's fix them now, and then they'll be broken for a period of time, and then they'll be unbroken. And that's the way. But then that doesn't get to, that's only with works that we've been asked to correct. That doesn't speak to all the other pages, all the other papers, all the other works that are then citing that. When everything is DIYs, maybe this will be fixed, but we're a long way from that.
And Irving, what's your thoughts on the citations change, or how does that sort of affect the community?
Yeah, I think that citations are still an issue, and I at least kind of peeking at some of the Q&A questions, that to my knowledge, no publisher has commented on citations formally in their name change policy. And if somebody does know, please correct me, because I would like to know how. And I think that really commented well in saying that the sort of the fear of the ways in which these changes will, presumably temporarily render the system, render the system different than it currently is in a slightly imperfect way, to recognize that these are changes that are, changes that are fluid, that we are just kind of rolling out things as we're able to, and that the sort of, again, sort of holding the supporting author identity as the top priority, I think is always good to keep in the back of your mind, because I think that in some of these, as we start to get into these more complicated issues, the point of all of this can sometimes be lost because of how complicated and challenging it is. And, to really, push the importance of trying, of still, not necessarily, creating a formal policy around something that's imperfect, but trying to make changes, as it benefits the author, and then working, then from the new problem that's created from that, working with that problem, instead of just being sort of stuck and scratching over and over at the same, at the same point, afraid to make a step forward. And I think that for me personally, I have alerts on my email for when my paper gets cited, and it's a little bit all over the place when I get my dead name gets cited, and not because there's also the issue of like Mendeley and EndNote and Zotero also not updating citations. And so then, if you're then putting citations in your paper and you've saved an article from the past and the authors changed their name, that, then when you add that citation to your paper, it's going to be wrong. And so there are even times that 2.5 years after my name has been changed, it still gets cited incorrectly, and that's where the sort of, talking about this as a community effort, not just on the point of publishers, but just getting everybody aware of this, then, can lead to also the sort of the personal practices that are also necessary of, I'm going to check the most updated place to make sure that this author's name is correct, and I think that when, especially when we talk about these sorts of things, maybe when it's not a like panel type discussion, but you can see people on Zoom sort of, go a little bit wide-eyed with that extra work. But, I really push back against that and say that, if you are somebody who has not had to worry about these sorts of issues, that you had it easier, and part of solidarity and part of equity is taking on a larger burden. And so, at least with this sort of citations thing is that we've done the easy part, and that even I, when I first got into this, didn't realize just how complicated the issue was. And I think that, a lot of people who now start thinking about it more, it is, quite existential, to think about it. And then, like Ed was saying, so then, we can make these smaller changes now to sort of mitigate harm in the best way that we can, while simultaneously looking at some of these larger overhauling ideas that, maybe are more around, how we can think about the philosophies of publishing, and then how those can change and then cascade into, into actualizing publishing. Like for example, what Ed was saying, and I am taking this, I am a experimental, chemist, and I am so grateful to be working with a lot of folks, a lot of trans folks who are part of the name change policy group, are in the, sciences and social sciences, but far more based in philosophy and theory than I am. And so I am a parrot for a lot of these. These are not original ideas, but, this from Tess Tannenbaum, really was the first person who mentioned to me this idea of seeking author autonomy in publishing, that, you have that essentially the control experiment was wrong. A name does change, and in order for publishing to work, and in order to track a public record, you need something that doesn't change, and that we need to divorce name with an unchanging variable. And so that means we have to invent a new unchanging variable, some sort of ID, some sort of number, some sort of barcode that, you know, then the name is it's an autofill, it's a watermark that can be changed by the author without permissions. You know, granted, then making sure that, you know, again, I think another thing that I think is not necessarily wrongly brought up, but I try to redirect it, is around, you know, like authentication of identity. And to me, that seems more of a you know, of a policy issue that surrounds, you know, journal ethics and the teams that look for people who are trying to maliciously change the public record, but doesn't necessarily need to fall on the shoulders of the people then who are trying to enact name change policies. I think that, you know, it's sort of realizing that a lot of wheelhouses need to be brought in to realize this in the best way possible.
Is there some comments you want to add, just Corinne, about verifying authenticity?
Well, the only thing I would say is we are mindful of that issue, and in every instance we've done all that we can to certainly minimize the burden on the authors. And there are things. What's really interesting is that the first approximation of this that has been suggested by others, and which was quickly we were disabused of by Tess, was, you know, oh well, we'll just ask them for official name change documents. And it's like, well, official name change documents aren't always allowed, or they might not even exist. And that was when I discovered that in the UK, for instance, your legal name is whatever name you use. There is no official way of changing your name. You can sign a deed poll, but that is not necessary. And actually, that is also not. It's official in a sense. You're making a declaration that this is the name I will use going forward, but you actually don't have to keep using that name. You could fill out a deed poll and then use a completely different name, and that completely different name that you are using is your legal name. Your legal name is the name that you use. There is no official record of what your legal name is. It's the name that you use. That's the UK. The US is different. The Netherlands is different. There are all these places where the things are different. So that's not the solution. The solution is, well, there are many different solutions. We just need to it's not straightforward. It's not straightforward. So there's no easy solution to that. We are still trying to find ways. There's a list of things that I say, if you want to make sure that the person who says that they're author on this is the author on this, there are lots of ways in which to do that. I would love it if more people used ORCID IDs, because that would be the thing that doesn't change and which doesn't have a social valence to it. That would be the ideal, but it's still in the minority. Maybe someday in the future that might work, but that's not today. Today we have to be comfortable with the messiness of it, and it's not just a logistical burden that we bear, and it's not just logistical complexity. There's also mathematical complexity in this, because the easiest way of making sure that citations in future are correctly cite the changed document would be to use a formal correction, but a formal correction puts many authors at harm's risk. So that's not the solution. But how do you make it? You can't simultaneously make it very public what the new citation is compared to the old citation without introducing the potential for harm. So the best thing you can do is encourage people, whenever they cite anything, to make sure they go and get the current version of that thing. Any system that would automatically alert people to that change introduces that harm. And so there isn't mathematically, there is something here that can't be fixed. The best thing that we could do is change the way we do things, exactly as Irving said, so that it's to make pointers immutable, and let the things that can change, should change, let them change. So going forward.
So we're talking about silently updating the version of record, and people encouraged always to go back to doing that. So no notifications to co-authors or things like that.
It's not our business. It's not our business to manage the relationship that authors have with their co-authors, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous to do, and also it introduces the idea that co-authors get to gatekeep. They don't. You don't. No one gets to decide. No one gets to gatekeep other people's identity, regardless of whether they've written papers with them or not. So we leave it to it's not perfect, but we leave it. We feel that it's the author's business to notify their co-authors or not, because that's the least amount of harm, and that's always been the guiding principle when we've thought about these issues: is how do we minimize harm? It's not how do we minimize workload. It's like, how do we minimize harm? Because we have a duty of responsibility to protect our authors, and it's also good business to be protecting our authors. So that's the pole star.
I want to add something to that as well, which I think is a sort of, again, a really interesting facet of this kind of being a sort of like free for all, where there are a lot of different minds addressing this problem. And I think that I come from the same camp as Ed, that I think that full author autonomy is necessary, but it's also interesting to think about the ways in which institutions can support authors around doing certain work. And so I know of a couple journals who, in their policy, instead of saying we won't notify co-authors, they'll say we, as a default, we won't notify co-authors of this change, but if you don't want to email them yourself, we can do it for you. And that was something that I was like, I didn't even think about that, because I am so used to sort of having to come out and do this big old spiel that I just like take scripts from the internet. I don't write them myself, and that takes the workload off, but I have learned that modality of existing, and so it is interesting to think about where it's helpful to take the strong stance, and where it is helpful to say that there's flexibility, and then changing based on that, because I think that it is an as needed basis, but it is sort of interesting to think about. And then in addition to that, sort of in terms of like taking the burden off authors, which is something that again we've talked about a lot, that and in regards to identifying verifying identity, just thinking about, again, this sort of the community that we need to pool together to support these changes. And can institutions, can universities, can labs, can employers help in the verification process in a way that is not requiring of a legal change, and in the same way that a website will verify your identity by sending you a link to your email or sending you a link to your phone, that isn't requiring you to send the legal paperwork of your birth certificate in order to show the computer that you're a person. It is like, how are we, like, that is like a pretty like point blank adaptation for the 21st century. Is that usable? Is that something to consider, and that that what is working now works great, and that, again, with, I think, in part of the sort of the 5 guiding principles, maintenance and upkeep, I think, doesn't necessarily just have to do with the name. I think it has to do with the entire system, and like looking towards the ways in which things can be improved, and not hesitating to implement them because we're comfortable where we're at. Because I think that if you get in the mindset of comfort, personal comfort at least, you might be ignoring or you just might not be open to or aware of other needs that exist.
Great, awesome. I just wanted to also maybe ask sort of what more publishers can do to help, and like, have you had any problems implementing certain changes when requests have come in? Maybe to you, Jessica.
Sorry, so the question is about
what
any-
more we can do as publishers to help the processes.
I mean, I think webinars like this is just definitely, you know, they're going to be crucial. I was going to share, you know, even just in the preparation for this webinar, I learned, I've already gotten a lot of good feedback that I'm taking back to our author name change policy team. So it's having the mindset of being iterative and engaging with other publishers. There are fortunately around a lot of diversity issues, publishers are coming together. You know, there's less of a competitive sense, and we're looking to learn from each other. And a lot of publishers have shared their policies, some of the nuances that they've faced. Different publishers I've chatted with have had authors request changes, you know, in figure captions and image captions, and we haven't faced that yet. So that was helpful to be able to have a dialogue around that. So I think that we'll certainly want to continue to improve, and so engaging with publishers is one part of that, and engaging with the authors as these requests come through will be another part of that, and maintaining record of that feedback and looking at it regularly and figuring out how we can make changes and improvements.
Yeah, thank you. So I mean, it's really sort of looking at like looking for, you know, larger community input and buy-in from all publishers.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for example, the joint commitment that the RSC put together, there's more than 50 publishers, I think, that are a part of that, and they had a, you know, subcommittee focused on author name change policies. And so I think that taking those opportunities to engage with other publishers is going to be crucial.
Excellent, excellent. All right, well, I don't know if either of you, like, we're getting to Q&A time. I've already noticed there's a few questions come in, and for anyone who still has questions, please feel free to start typing through. Just going to have to read them out sort of verbatim. Do any policies address citations of the papers that reflect the change? I think we've kind of covered that earlier on. So, and the next,
I mean, these are. I would just add that at the moment we're only really able to change citations within a work that's being corrected. There's a whole bunch of work that needs to be considered, and I don't even know what the answer to that is, to change citations. I mean, the using DOIs to update these things might be one, but the current technical infrastructure is just not set up to be able to update citations in works that are other than the works of the author who is changing their name.
So the author provides a list of exact works that they want changed, and anything outside of that is really difficult. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's really difficult. There are policy issues, but it's technically essentially impossible with the current infrastructure.
We're getting A&I, abstract and indexing services on board. Help? Are there any of those signed up, or to? A lot of we've done a lot to try and make sure that these cascade through to those, but then they won't cascade back. So you could correct the citation on dimensions, but the correction on dimensions doesn't then correct that citation on publications apart from that author, say at Springer Nature or Wiley or Elsevier or any of the other publishers' publications, for instance. So it's just one-way traffic at the moment.
At the moment.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that?
No, I would agree with Ed's feedback. That's definitely where we're sort of situated at the moment. But of course, you know, we do redeliver content to the third-party indexing services. And then of course, as Irving pointed out, it does take a while for those to get updated, but we deliver them, you know, ASAP. That's part of that return window there.
And I think I would just add that, you know, that with, oh my gosh, I totally just lost my train of thought. Sorry.
It's all right, we'll
Oh
come
my
back.
goodness,
If
it's
the
early
thought
in the
comes
morning.
back,
Yeah, we can come back to it.
no worries. So is the standard for authors to just ask for all systems to be updated with the new name or just the published content? Yeah, okay, I think we've pretty much well covered that.
Actually, no. So there are systems. So there are legal restrictions on our ability to change our systems for authors. So we can change it. We can change the published papers, but if they have like an account with us, we need them to change their account on our systems, and that's actually a legal requirement. So it's complicated, as I keep saying.
Is there any differentiation being made by publishers for that, for those updates?
I'm not sure. Differentiation between what?
The standard, I suppose. I'm going to infer from the question.
Oh,
well, I mean, I think that
probably.
you know, at least in terms of maybe not necessarily that individual publishers can make a differentiation, but I think it is, again, you know, in the same way that we're realizing with more folks participating in this, that they'll bring up, you know, problems or issues of, you should consider changing names here, you should consider, you know, in text, and consider this, that I think that, you know, sort of along the lines of transparency, publishers can pass along that information of like, hey, we're changing your name, but, you know, you might also consider the other places that your name needs to be changed. Like if you have any other publications with that name, you know, like to sort of to reference that you know, they might have to go through more publishers. And, you know, as much as that is, again, you know, directly putting work on the author, I think that then just remaining silent about it isn't necessarily helpful. But saying, you know, yeah, consider that your name will be cited, you know, obviously it's up to you, but consider that, you know, you might, if the same people are citing your name a lot, and, you know, you let them know that there's been a change, then that might help with, you know, getting incorrectly cited in the future. Or, you know, if you've changed your name with us and you have other publications that you want to change, reach out to those, you know, those publishers. And that's kind of the best solution now. But I think that in sort of making these sort of bridging organizations where, say, your place of employment, there's actually a really interesting and cool incentive that happened in the United States with the national labs and a number of different, about 30 different publishers, where the national labs would, on the behalf of the author, get all of their names changed on previous publications, instead of the author having to go out and search for all of their papers, which again increases as you know, are further and further along in your career when you change your name.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah. Another question here is, are publishers deleting all references to previous names on the article record, or is that being retained by the publishers for auditing purposes?
We are. When the name is changed, the name is changed. We don't keep a list. We don't keep the old versions, and that's mostly because it's difficult to do that. So no, when the article is changed, the article is changed.
Same here. When the article is changed, it's changed. I don't believe we're retaining a record, but I would need to check further with our IT to figure that out, because I feel like there was an in-depth discussion about this, just to make sure, you know, if for some reason there was a reason, if, for example, in the case of divorce we mentioned earlier, if they wanted to change it back, having access to that information as well. So I'd have to check on that further, but yeah.
Great. Yeah, it's good to know that there's, I suppose it's just, some things are too hard and it works out well, maybe. So some publishers were slow to act on this need, or even still to begin thinking about it. Do you think this will affect where authors impacted by restrictive name change policies will choose to publish? What do you think? I suppose it's everyone.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, especially with the kind of rampant extremist hunt of trans people in a lot of public settings. I think that, you know, this is a something that feels like a right to have your name, you know, be reflected the way that you want in your published record, and that, you know, hesitation, you know, while hesitation that's on the basis of you know, sort of technical implementation, or hesitation that's on the part of, you know, making sure that, you know, the guidance or the policy that's being published is inclusive, and making sure that the systems are in place to make changes happen, you know, sort of rapidly and thoroughly, while that is respected. You know, we're still hearing these really, you know, sort of outdated, you know, these outdated pushbacks, you know, sort of around, you know, oh, God forbid we start being more inclusive and then we lose a handle on this and all of publishing goes up in flames. You know, and I think that it's challenging because, you know, I personally know of certain journals who have like really dragged their feet or are still not doing anything, and I am thankful that I am not in that field. You know, I think in the same way that, you know, we've seen, you know, sort of the community backlash with journals publishing articles that have extremely problematic opinions about DEI efforts or about women's rights, you know, that then, you know, people, it's twofold, because then people choose, you know, publishers saying, you know, like, we're not going to, you know, support these journals, authors are leaving those journals, you know, that sort of thing. But at the same time, there are people on the inside who work for them, or who, you know, it's their subfield, and so they have a lot of publications with them. And so I think that it is important to not turn away, especially allies, not turn away from putting pressure on these journals, because there are people who are trapped there. You know, and as frustrating as it is for you to see somebody dragging their feet, imagine a trans author who's the person whose feet, you know, like who has feet on the ground and is actively, you know, having to push. And so, you know, we still can, you know, criticize and critique, while at the same time, you know, still providing support and still being present. You know, and like I said, like, I do think that, you know, I think that it is the sort of nature of this issue, I think will and is starting to you know, impact what kind of actions authors take personally, you know, to distance themselves from certain journals. So I definitely agree that that is happening and will continue to happen, but that that's not an excuse for them just abandoning that cause, I think.
These policies are an expression of a publisher's desire to protect the well-being of their authors, and that, you know, if I were an author, I would not want to publish with a publisher that had no concern for the well-being of its authors. And so, you know, different people will feel different ways, but you don't have to be a trans author to care that you're publishing with a publisher that cares about your well-being as a human being. And so that's the bottom line for me.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, well put by both of you, really. Yeah. Right. Okay, but we've got a multi-part question here, so I'll break it down. We are a little bit over time, but it's the last question in the thing, so I think we'll just go through it and then we can finish up. So what volume of name change requests have you received so far across all journals, to both Ed and Jessica? And how many papers on average per author?
I haven't done the calculation of the average. The number is well over 100 authors in the last year. I don't have the exact number to hand, but it's well in excess of 100, which actually is not that many, given the tens to hundreds of thousands of authors that we have. It varies a lot. The upper number is about, I think the largest number is 17. There were 17 works that we published by an author, and this was over quite an expanse of time. So that takes time. Typically, it's of the order of, I just off the top of my head, I would say it's of the order of 2 to 5 works, but it varies quite a lot.
Yeah, and we're actually a bit smaller than that. We've, I think since we rolled out the policy, we've had 10 to 20 requests total. And it is a smaller number. I think the max I've seen was maybe 4 or 5 from an author, but it's usually 1 or 2.
Yeah, but these requests, I mean, each individual is obviously really worth, it's worth doing that for them, even if it doesn't seem like a whole bunch of people. It's really important to do for each individual who does come with that request. Yeah.
The second question is clearly directed to me. Yes, we can, should, and will improve the transparency of the process. The challenge to date has been, because we have different ways of publishing books and conference proceedings and lots of different imprints, so Nature and Palgrave and Springer and BMC and ADIS and ADIS, and APRESS, we get things coming from a lot of different angles, but we are seeking to improve, better centralized, better transparency on how the process should happen, and hopefully we can direct things through that channel. So that's, that was specifically about Springer, so I thought I'd address that.
Well, and I also think, in addition that, that there has been a larger call for more transparency across, across publishers, because, I think that to submit that, that document, or, submit that form, or send an email, to get the confirmation and then just be waiting, it is something that is additional work for the author. And so it seems like a pretty simple way of, of sort of, again, redistributing the work that's required, that, the author was the one who had to make the request, and then also is the one who has to keep checking in to make sure that their stuff is being handled correctly, is a burden. And so in minimizing burdens, I think that increased transparency is something that has been called for. But, even more so, I think that, that Saoirse deserves, like, a big shout out, because that, these are the venues in which we have to advocate for them ourselves, because we don't get our emails answered. We have to show up at a panel and then ask a publisher directly. And I think that, again, it's not a critique. I think that it's that this is a challenging and complicated subject. And I think that, it's important to recognize that, how hard we are as individual authors are having to work to get our voices heard, and highlights the importance of just having these types of conversations all over the place. I've even in my own just personal, or I guess professional spheres, talked about coming to this panel, and they were like, wow, that was like 2 years ago when it started though, right? And that's just like makes me laugh, because it really is going to be probably something that's going to last for the entirety of the rest of my career, and beyond that. And so, I think that again, it's a really great lesson in looking and searching for feedback from authors to help you move forward faster. And also, if it's not necessarily you, I think we recognize that it's not necessarily like you personally who's the one that's stopping this, but it is great to be able to just take this and say, hi, remember you were slow on this? Well, like, time to speed it up, and that kind of pressure, might be necessary now, but I think it's good then to act on that pressure while also looking at ways of mitigating, mitigating the work and harm around things that are already in place.
Great.
A great question.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thanks, Saoirse, and thanks for writing your name phonetically as well to pronounce. she also has a follow-up question: is it ever going to be technologically feasible to incorporate ORCIDs into generated reference lists, given the enormous number of publishers that exist? In other words, how much coordination is there between publishers?
I mean, I hope so. The challenge is that ORCID is not a universally adopted standard. I wish it were. I've spent literally 10 years trying to get researchers around the world to embrace ORCID more. It's tough. If it were universal, then it would happen overnight. It's a system problem. I don't know how to fix it. We keep on, because I mean, it really does make the whole process easier. If someone has changed their name, if someone has registered their ORCID with a publication and then changes their name, all I have to do is click on their ORCID from the paper. It goes to their ORCID account. I see their name has changed, and I can say, they're done. That's the authentication step. It's really easy. I have confidence in it. We can all have confidence in it. What would be greater is if our platforms dynamically checked ORCIDs to be able to change their name. That would be the ideal. But because ORCID isn't yet universal, there will be an understandable reluctance to pretend that, or rather to regard it as a standard, simply because it's still growing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm less familiar exactly with how the technological piece would work, but if ORCID could become more prevalent, that would certainly help. And, you know, we're doing our part, making it, you know, so we slowly rolled it out, making it required for corresponding authors, and we're testing it out to make it required for all authors, to make sure there won't be any pushback given certain communities. But, you know, I think that would be a huge help. But yeah, I guess maybe more education around ORCID and how it can be helpful, that might help. I know some authors who have, you know, gotten more than one ORCID, not realizing that they really just need one. It's not one for each publisher. It's not one for each paper. It's just one for you. So that might be another helpful piece in that puzzle.
Yeah, and just, I mean, I would add to, you know, how much coordination is there between publishers. I think forums like this, you know, are a start, and there's, you know, industry associations like the STM Association, where people do come together and discuss these and work on industry-wide issues. And yeah, so I think, yeah, this is one of the many ways in which it can be addressed. I suppose, yeah, I suppose as well, maybe, how do you feel about sort of the future? Do you think it's going to get better, you know, with all publishers working together? Are you feeling confident that, even though it's been 2 years, to get onto a panel discussion, that changes will happen better as we go on? I'm
definitely feeling very optimistic, just with the different diversity, equity, and inclusion projects I've been on, the variety of publishers who are participating, the information they're willing to share, you know, surveys that other publishers have run. They've shared results of their surveys with other publishers to help, you know, build on the shoulders of others. So I think we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree as well. You know, I think that you have to be, I mean, as somebody who is transgender trying to make these changes happen, I think to just keep existing in this space, I have to be optimistic. But I think that it's helpful that changes are continuing to happen. You know, I think that especially with, you know, the work that's being done with COPE, the sort of new frontiers of looking at these relationships between institutions and publishing, you know, to support authors on multiple fronts, I think is really exciting. You know, and I think that there's, you know, the site things like, you know, citations and references and you know, old PDFs and books, and, you know, that these things are, you know, periodically being addressed, and you know, it's understandably slow, but that every time a discussion happens, a new challenge is addressed, and people feel excited about it, I think is really what is keeping me going in all of this.
And yeah, just to echo, I'm really optimistic because this is part of the DEI theme, and you know, it's always, but it should always be a concern to the people who are saying the right thing are kept honest in doing the right thing. This cannot be just lip service. And frankly, this has been such a painful transition to implement. It demonstrates that we are willing to actually put action behind the rhetoric of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I hope it will continue to be.
Great. Well, I suppose that is it. We've run over time significantly. So thank you for everyone that has stayed on. Yeah, it's been wonderful to speak with the three of you, and I feel like I've learned a lot, and I hope all those people participating live and who will be watching the recording will equally get as much value out of it as I have. So to all my panelists, so Jessica, Ed, and Irving, thank you so much for your time and your energy and your work. Yeah, and thank you for everyone who's still here. Enjoy the rest of your day, wherever it may be.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.